Here are some of my animations. They're made 100% in Premiere. I do not use any other softwares. Improving my animations is basically how I made my first 10K per month at 15. After that, I learned about storytelling and retention and all of this stuff, but I knew practically zero about them at that point. So I will walk you through 3 ideas or 3 steps that if you implement correctly, you're gonna be more likely to make better animations and more likely to make more money. Making animations easy to understand. I'll explain all the practical stuff later. I'll actually walk you through how I made this animation that you see on the screen right now. But first, you gotta imagine the animation before making it. There's infinite ways to explain something visually. The best way is the easiest to understand. Never animate something that can be shown with footage. You should only animate hypothetical stuff that didn't happen, or stuff that will happen later in the video, and you don't want to show the footage so you don't ruin the surprise, so you don't spoil the video. So you just animate it of what could happen. Now if you have a hypothetical that wasn't shown with footage, there's now infinite ways that you can animate it visually. The best way to show it is the easiest to understand for the viewer. So I'm gonna give you an example of an animation that I did and what another editor could have made instead.
Time to do some math. The pyramid is made up of a 32 by 32 by 32 size block, meaning that each individual face is 1,024 iron blocks. And since each block is made up of 9 ingots,
And now here's mine.
math. The pyramid is made up of a 32 by 32 by 32 size block, meaning that each individual face is 1,024 iron blocks. And since each block is made up of 9 ingots, that means we need...
Now we could have just explained it with text, like the first example, but that would have been harder to understand, which is bad for the video. So instead of that, I made an animation that replicates exactly what he was saying. First starting with the beacon, and then picking a plug that made the beacon, and then showing that this block is made out of X numbers of actual blocks, and then showing that that one block was made with 9 iron ingots, which hopefully made this super complex example easier to understand. Also, tip from me, if you watch any of my animations, I like to have half a second between each new element, because the viewer cannot look at 2 places at the same time. So try to at least keep half a second between each new thing that you introduce. Okay, now we get into the fun part. After making an animation understandable, you gotta make it look fancy. So this is where the magic happens, and this is the room that you have to separate yourself from all the average editors. How to make animations look fancy. So I'm gonna show you how I made this animation and all the small details that I added to make it look more realistic. As a disclaimer, this is not supposed to be a step-by-step tutorial. You're not supposed to copy that example. You can copy it if you want for practice, I don't care. But the idea is to show you what small building blocks add up to make an animation look realistic like this one. Making a complex animation like that consists of making a background, making some stuff for the foreground, and adding lighting and overlay. Starting with the background. I like to theme my animations depending on the video idea. So like in this video that was Oppenheimer themed, I made an animation that was on a wall table. Or this video that was skydiving themed, I made all the animations look like they were dropping from an airplane with the attitude counter on the right of the screen, and you can show all the clouds passing by. Or in this video about killing dogs where I made a chamber where dogs were being killed. It was a light-hearted video. You could technically for the background just blur the actual footage and put an animation on top of it, but that doesn't give you much room to separate yourself from average editors. Anyone can do that. So I like to have at least some animations in each video, have like a background and a fully fleshed scene. I started with putting a desert PNG that I picked from Google, and then I downloaded the Minecraft PNG and put it in the top left corner of the screen. I added some drop shadows that was the same color as the sun, and added some glow to make it look shiny, and made it move subtly from left to right like a daylight cycle. And then I made an adjustment layer and added some handheld shake to it. And then using Remetry color, I changed the color of the desert to make it look more saturated and just fit the theme of the animation more. And then I used Blockbench to get this camel animation, and I replicated the angle of the scene so the camel looks like it's a part of it. I then replicated the camel, added basic 3D, and then added tint to make it black, and then I added blur, and then I decreased the opacity of it to make it look like it has a shadow. And then I added some lighting to him. You can do that with drop shadow, but I use a plugin called PCC. And then I moved this shadow a bit to match the angle of the sun. And then I added a pyramid picture. I masked it out, and then I put it in the right corner of the screen behind the sand dunes, because that area of the screen was kinda empty. When stuff are farther away from the camera, they get more blurry. So I added some blur to it. I then separated all the sand dunes to the foreground and to the sky, so I can add more blur to it the farther away we go. So now the pyramid is more blurred in the sand dunes, and the sand dunes are more blurred in the foreground, which is not blurry at all. And then I added a waveform to simulate what a mirage would look like, which turned out pretty cool. I then named everything, so when I go back to the background, I can change it without getting confused. I then exported the background so it becomes less laggy while I work on the foreground. So for the foreground, I wanted to add something simple, so I used a Minecraft tumbleweed GIF. I freezed the GIF and added some transparency to it, so it looks like a real tumbleweed. And then I moved it super close to the camera, and made it move from left to right. And then I made it bounce up and down in a cartoony way, and then I added some drop shadow like we did on the camera. And then I added some lighting to it using PCC. We're now on the last step, lighting and overlays. So first of all, I found the sand, dust, green screen, and then I made it start off strongly and then fade off as we got into the animation. I then added an adjustment layer and then made everything brighter and more saturated and more yellow, so warmer, to simulate the look of the sun, and made it only apply to stuff around the sun and slowly fade out the farther away from the sun we go. I then went back to the background really quick to change some details that I didn't like, which was super easy because we named everything already. So at this point I already had an animation that looked super cool, but I also wanted to add an actual explanation to show you what it would look like in a real video. So I made a nest and added some lighting to it, and then went inside of the nest and made this quick animation. It's basically a player just coming in and explaining how to craft a pickaxe. And then went back to the main sequence and then added some drop shadow to it like we did on the camera and the tumbleweed. And like that we have this animation. Again, this isn't supposed to be a step-by-step tutorial. When I started out, I just wanted to know what goes into making a complex animation like that because it seemed overwhelming, so I wanted to break it down so you can make similar but not exactly the same stuff. So the last step of making an animation like this is adding sound effects. Sound effects guide what you're supposed to look at, so you should focus mainly on adding sound effects to the important stuff that's happening, like something popping up into the screen. I try to be realistic with sound effects, but sometimes you add some fictional sounds that are supposed to guide the viewer's eyes. So when an image pops up, you should add a pop-up sound effect, which isn't realistic, that doesn't happen in real life, but it's just to guide the viewer's eyes to the pop-up. So when I thought of a desert, the first thing that came to mind is some wind sound, so I added that. So I added some super quiet whoosh sound effect for the sand going out of the screen, and then I added a fun sound effect for the tumbleweed bouncing, and then I added a camel sound effect for him sitting down, and then I added some walking sound effect for the player, and then timed it that each time he touches the ground there's a footstep. And then I added an eagle sound effect because it's a desert, that gives it more of a desert theme. And then I added a pop-up sound effect for each UI pop-up, so that's the crafting table and all the items inside of it. And bam, you have this animation. So since you made it this far into the video, that means you're cool, so I have a gift for you. I made a Discord server so you can connect with other editors that are trying to achieve the same goals as you, and I'm also gonna be answering all your questions in the Discord server. So the link is in the description, and thank you for watching.